I'm Michelle Ray, 28, and I came back from 2 tours in Iraq with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fierce loyalty to the people who mattered most. For years, I'd been the one who showed up, sending money home, calling every week, making sure my family knew they could count on me no matter what. But when I returned home early from deployment to find my grandmother dying alone while my parents partied in Ibiza, posting vacation photos instead of answering her desperate calls, I made a decision that shattered everything they thought they knew about me. Have you ever sacrificed everything for people who couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone when it mattered most? If so, drop your story in the comments. You're definitely not alone in this. Before we dive in, let me know what corner of the world you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, smash that like button and subscribe for more real stories about standing up when no one else will. What I did next with my grandmother's will changed our family forever. I was 7 when Grandma Ruth taught me to make her famous apple turnovers. She'd pull a chair up to the counter in her small kitchen, the one with yellow wallpaper that had been there since the 70s, and let me roll out the dough. Her hands would cover mine, guiding the rolling pin back and forth until the pastry was paper thin. "Patience, sweetheart," she'd say. "Good things take time." My parents were different. Dad worked in finance, always chasing the next deal, the next promotion. Mom was a social coordinator for a luxury resort company, planning events for people who spent more on a weekend than most families made in a month. They were busy people with busy lives, and I learned early that Grandma's house was where I went for consistency. Every summer, I'd spend 2 months with her while my parents traveled for work. She'd take me to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, introduce me to every vendor by name, and we'd come home with bags of vegetables and stories about whose grandson just graduated college or whose daughter was getting married. In the evenings, we'd sit on her front porch, drinking sweet tea and watching the neighbors walk their dogs. When I was 16 and announced I wanted to join the military after high school, my parents were horrified. They'd already picked out colleges, already planned my trajectory into something respectable and profitable. But Grandma Ruth just nodded and said, "That girl's got purpose. Let her find it." She was the only one who came to my graduation from basic training. My parents sent flowers and an apology about a conference they couldn't miss. Grandma Ruth drove 8 hours in her old Buick, wearing her best dress and carrying a disposable camera. She took pictures of everything and cried when they called my name. During my first deployment to Afghanistan, she sent letters every week. Real letters, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, not emails or text messages. She'd tell me about her garden, about the new family that moved in next door, about how Mrs. Patterson's cat kept getting into her flower beds. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of details that reminded me there was still a world where people worried about cats and tomatoes and whether it might rain on Sunday. My parents sent care packages occasionally, filled with expensive protein bars and gadgets I didn't need. They meant well, but Grandma's letters were what I treasured. She understood that I needed to hear about life continuing, not about how proud everyone was or how much they missed me. When I came back that first time, Grandma insisted on cooking a welcome-home dinner. My parents flew in from wherever they'd been, Spain, I think, and we all sat around her dining room table, the one that had hosted every holiday dinner of my childhood. Mom talked about the resort properties she was managing, Dad discussed market volatility, and I mostly stayed quiet. The gap between their world and mine felt enormous. But Grandma asked the right questions. Not about combat or missions or anything dramatic. She wanted to know about the food, about the people I'd met, about whether the landscape reminded me of anywhere I'd been before. She listened like my answers mattered, like I was still the same person who'd helped her make apple turnovers in her yellow kitchen. I re-enlisted partly because civilian life felt complicated and partly because the structure made sense to me. My parents supported this decision more than the first one. They'd started telling their friends about their daughter in the service, turning it into something they could be proud of publicly. But Grandma worried. "You sure about this, honey?" she asked during one of our phone calls. "There's no shame in coming home." "I'm not running away," I told her. "This is what I do." "I know what you do," she said. "I'm asking what you want." It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. My second deployment was Iraq, and it was different. Harder in some ways, more routine in others. The letters from Grandma kept coming, but they were shorter now, her handwriting a little shakier. She was in her early 80s and starting to slow down, though she'd never admit it. My parents had started hiring people to help with her yard work and heavy cleaning, which she tolerated but didn't like. "I don't need strangers in my house," she complained during one of our rare phone conversations. "I've been taking care of myself since before you were born." But I could hear the fatigue in her voice, and when my parents mentioned that she'd been forgetting appointments or leaving the stove on, I started to worry. Still, she was Grandma Ruth. She'd been the constant in all our lives for so long that imagining her as frail seemed impossible. My parents, meanwhile, had discovered social media. They'd joined Facebook and Instagram, posting pictures from their travels and work events. They looked happy in their photos, tanned and smiling at restaurant tables and resort pools. They'd started taking more elaborate vacations, longer trips to more exotic places. Dad had made partner at his firm, Mom had been promoted to regional director, and they were living the life they'd always worked toward. I followed their accounts from my base computer, looking at pictures of wine tastings in Tuscany and snorkeling excursions in the Maldives. It felt like watching a movie about people I used to know. Sometimes they'd post throwback photos that included me, family pictures from holidays or my high school graduation, and friends would comment about how proud they must be of their military daughter. They'd respond with heart emojis and American flag symbols, playing the part of patriotic parents. But in all those posts, in all those pictures of their beautiful life, I never saw Grandma Ruth. I had 10 months left on my deployment when everything changed. The mission that brought me home early wasn't supposed to exist, and I can't talk about most of it even now. What matters is that I was given emergency leave and found myself on a transport plane heading back to the States with 48 hours notice. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. There hadn't been time, and part of me wanted to surprise them. I pictured walking into Grandma's kitchen, seeing her face light up when she realized I was really there. I imagined calling my parents and hearing the excitement in their voices when they learned their daughter was home safe. But the taxi from the airport took me to a house that looked wrong somehow. The lawn was overgrown, newspapers were piled up on the front porch, and when I used my old key to let myself in, the smell hit me immediately. Something was very, very wrong. I found Grandma Ruth in her bedroom, barely conscious, dehydrated, and weaker than I'd ever seen her. The woman who'd raised me through every summer of my childhood, who'd written me letters every week for 2 years of deployments, who'd been the steady heartbeat of our family, was dying alone. And my parents were posting pictures from Ibiza, not answering their phones, showing the world how wonderfully their life was going while the woman who'd given them everything slowly faded away in a house that smelled like abandonment and broken promises. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. The first thing I did was call 911. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and I rode with Grandma to the hospital, holding her hand while they worked to stabilize her. She was conscious but weak, squeezing my fingers when she recognized my voice. "You came back," she whispered. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm right here." The emergency room doctor was direct. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, what looked like a minor stroke that had happened days or possibly weeks earlier. She needed immediate care, but more than that, she needed someone who'd been watching out for her. "How long has she been alone?" the doctor asked. I couldn't answer that question because I didn't know. From the hospital, I tried calling my parents again. Straight to voicemail, both phones. Their Facebook pages showed they were at some beachfront restaurant, posting pictures of seafood and sunset cocktails with captions about living their best life. While Grandma was getting 4 fluids and being admitted for observation, I went back to her house to assess the situation. The refrigerator was nearly empty except for some expired milk and wilted lettuce. The landline had 17 voicemails, doctors' offices, the pharmacy, her neighbor Mrs. Patterson asking if she was all right, a few hang-ups that were probably scam calls, and one message from my mother. "Hi, Mom, it's Carol. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. We're in Spain this week, having the most amazing time. I'll try to call you again soon. Love you." The message was 4 days old. I spent that first night at the hospital, sleeping in the chair beside Grandma's bed. She was more alert by morning, and her color was better, but she looked smaller somehow. Fragile in a way that scared me. "How long were you alone?" I asked her. She turned her head away. "I don't want to worry you, Grandma. A few days. Maybe a week." I had a little spell, and I couldn't get to the phone right away. And then I was just so tired. A week. She'd been lying there for a week while my parents posted vacation photos and ignored her calls. The woman who'd never missed a birthday, never forgotten to send Christmas cards, never failed to show up when any of us needed her, had been abandoned when she needed us most. I called my parents again from the hospital parking lot. This time, my mother answered. "Michelle? Honey, what's wrong? Why are you calling from this number?" "I'm at the hospital with Grandma." "Where are you?" "The hospital? What happened?" "We're in Ibiza. We're supposed to fly home tomorrow. When's the last time you talked to her?" There was a pause. "I called her a few days ago. Maybe last week." She didn't answer, but you know how she is about the phone sometimes. "She's been alone and sick for over a week, Mom. She almost died." "What do you mean almost died?" "Michelle, you're scaring me." I laid out the facts without emotion. The dehydration, the stroke, the empty refrigerator, the pile of newspapers, the 17 voicemails. I told her about finding Grandma barely conscious in a house that reeked of neglect. "We were supposed to come back tomorrow anyway," Mom said, and I could hear Dad in the background asking what was happening. "We had no idea." "She never said anything about feeling sick." "She called you multiple times. You didn't answer." "We've been busy, and the time difference, she needed help." "Michelle, that's not fair." "We didn't know. But they should have known. That was the point. They should have been checking on her, making sure she was eating, noticing when she stopped answering her phone. Instead, they'd been too busy living their Instagram-perfect life to pay attention to the woman who'd raised them both, who'd been there for every crisis and celebration, who'd never once failed to show up when they needed her. My father got on the phone. "How bad is it? Do we need to come home right now?" "You should have come home a week ago." "Michelle, we didn't know." I hung up. That afternoon, I went to Grandma's house and found her safe. She'd mentioned it once years ago, telling me where she kept important documents in case anything ever happened to her. The combination was my birthday, something my parents probably didn't even know. Inside were her will, her insurance policies, her deed, and her financial records. I'd expected to find typical elderly person finances, some savings, maybe a small pension, her house. What I found instead was over $400,000 in certificates of deposit and savings accounts, plus the house, which was worth at least another $300,000 in the current market. Grandma Ruth, who clipped coupons and drove a 20-year-old Buick and darned her own socks, was worth $750,000. The will was straightforward. Everything split 3 ways between my parents and me, with specific instructions about her jewelry and a few family heirlooms. But there was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the front, dated 6 months earlier. "If I die and Carol and David are not here, but Michelle is, I want Michelle to handle everything. She's the only one who understands what family means." I sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her careful, quiet life, reading that note over and over. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known that when the time came, I'd be the one who showed up. My parents called twice that evening. I let both calls go to voicemail, then listened to them from the hospital where I was spending another night beside Grandma's bed. "Michelle, please call us back. We've changed our flights. We're coming home first thing in the morning. We're worried sick." The second message was from my father. "Michelle, your mother is beside herself. We know you're upset, but we need to talk about this like adults. Call us back." Adults. That was rich, coming from 2 people who'd spent the week posting party photos while their 83-year-old mother lay dying alone. I turned off my phone and focused on what mattered. Grandma was stable, the doctors were optimistic, and for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I belonged and what I needed to do. When I woke up the next morning, my phone showed 99 missed calls. The missed calls were from everyone. My parents, my Aunt Linda in California, my cousin Mike in Denver, numbers I didn't recognize. Apparently, Word had spread through the family network that I was home, that Grandma was sick, and that I wasn't answering my phone. I listened to a few of the voicemails while drinking hospital coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. My mother, crying. My father, angry. Aunt Linda demanding to know what was happening. Mike asking if he needed to drive down. The most recent call was from someone claiming to be my parents' attorney. That got my attention. Miss Ray, this is Robert Martinez from Martinez and Associates. Your parents have retained our services regarding some concerns about your grandmother's care and certain family property. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. They'd lawyered up. Less than 24 hours after learning that their daughter had saved their mother's life, they'd hired an attorney. Because I'd looked in the safe. Because I'd taken responsibility when they couldn't be bothered to answer their phones. Grandma was awake when I came back to her room, sitting up and picking at a breakfast tray. You look tired, sweetheart. I'm fine. How are you feeling? Better. Much better. She studied my face. What's wrong? I showed her my phone, the screen full of missed call notifications. Everyone's worried about you. But they're also worried about your will. And your house. And why I'm the one here instead of them. Grandma set down her plastic spoon and looked out the window. It was a gray morning, the kind of October day that made you want to stay inside with a cup of tea and a good book. I changed that will 6 months ago, she said finally. Added that note. I was hoping I'd never need it. Why? Because I knew if something happened to me, you'd come home. You always come home when family needs you. But Carol and David, they've gotten so busy with their own lives. She wasn't angry when she said it, just sad. That somehow made it worse. They're flying back today, I told her. Good. That's good. She reached for my hand. Michelle, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let this destroy the family. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But don't let my mistakes turn you into someone bitter. Your mistakes? Grandma, you didn't do anything wrong. I enabled them. I made it too easy for them to take me for granted. And now you're the one dealing with the consequences. I wanted to argue, but she was right. She'd spent decades being the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who never complained or made demands. She'd trained them to expect that she'd always be there, no matter what. The money doesn't matter, she continued. The house doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand family isn't just DNA. Family is who shows up. That afternoon, my parents arrived at the hospital looking like they'd been through a hurricane. Mom's hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her face makeup-free and puffy from crying. Dad wore wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that looked like he'd grabbed it off a hotel room floor. They'd clearly caught the first flight they could find and rushed straight from the airport. They brought flowers and guilt and lawyers' business cards. Oh, Mom, my mother said, rushing to Grandma's bedside. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Grandma hugged her, stroked her hair, made comforting sounds like she always did. Like she was the one who needed to provide comfort after nearly dying alone. My father shook my hand awkwardly, like we were meeting for the first time. Thank you for being here. For handling everything. Someone had to. Michelle. Mom turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed. Can we talk? Privately? We walked to the family waiting area, a depressing room with beige furniture and motivational posters about healing and hope. My parents sat across from me like we were in a business meeting. We know you're angry, Dad started. Do you? We should have been here. We should have been checking on her more regularly. We take full responsibility for that. I waited. But Michelle, Mom leaned forward, going through her personal papers, taking her will from the safe. That crosses a line. She was dying. Someone needed to know what her wishes were. That someone should have been us. We're her children. Where were you? That's not the point. That's exactly the point. I kept my voice level professional. You were posting pictures of Paya while she was dehydrated and starving. You ignored 17 phone calls while she was having a stroke. You hired an attorney before you even asked how she was doing today. We were scared, Dad said. We didn't know what was happening, and then we couldn't reach you, and Linda called saying you were making decisions about Mom's care without consulting the family. I saved her life. We know that. We're grateful for that. But now we need to work together, as a family, to figure out next steps. Next steps. They were talking about their mother like she was a business problem that needed managing. The attorney says that technically, what you did could be considered, Mom started. Could be considered what? She looked at Dad, who cleared his throat. Could be considered improper. Taking documents from her safe without permission, making medical decisions. I have her healthcare power of attorney. She gave it to me before my first deployment. That stopped them. They looked at each other with something that might have been surprise or might have been calculation. She never mentioned that, Mom said. She shouldn't have had to mention it. You should have been involved enough in her life to know. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, other families were having their own difficult conversations. A young couple arguing quietly about insurance coverage. An elderly man sleeping in a chair beside what was probably his wife's bed. Normal people dealing with normal crises, probably without lawyers. What do you want? Dad asked finally. It was the first honest question either of them had asked since they arrived. I want Grandma to be safe. I want her to have the care she needs, whether that's at home with help or in a facility or whatever she chooses. I want her to be surrounded by people who actually give a damn about her well-being, not just her bank account. Michelle, that's not fair. I want you to stop posting vacation pictures for 5 minutes and remember that she's the reason you could afford to take those vacations. She's the one who helped with the down payment on your house. She's the one who paid for my college tuition when I decided not to join the military right away. She's been subsidizing your lifestyle for decades, and the one time she needed something from you, you were too busy living your best life to answer the phone. Mom started crying again. Dad stared at his hands. We'll do better, he said. Will you? Yes. I looked at these people who'd raised me, who'd loved me in their own complicated way, who'd failed so completely when it mattered most. They meant well. They always meant well. But meaning well wasn't enough anymore. Then prove it. Proving it turned out to be more complicated than any of us expected. Over the next week, while Grandma recovered in the hospital, my parents transformed into the kind of adult children they probably should have been all along. They took shifts at her bedside, brought her crossword puzzles and magazines, and started making lists of home modifications that would help her live safely. But there was a performative quality to it all that made me uncomfortable. Mom posted pictures of herself holding Grandma's hand with captions about family and love and being grateful for every moment. Dad researched assisted living facilities with the same intensity he brought to investment portfolios, creating spreadsheets comparing costs and amenities. They were trying, but it felt like they were trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else that they were good people who'd just made a mistake. The lawyers were a different problem. Mr. Martinez wanted to meet with all of us to discuss the family situation and ensure everyone's interests were protected. I agreed to one meeting, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to understand exactly what my parents thought I'd done wrong. We met at his office on a Thursday afternoon. Martinez was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of dealing with family disputes. He'd prepared a folder for each of us and spoke in the measured tones of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. Let me be clear about why we're here, he began. Your parents are concerned that some actions taken during Mrs. Ray's medical crisis might be construed as overreaching or potentially problematic from a legal standpoint, such as accessing her safe without explicit permission, making unilateral decisions about her care, taking possession of important documents. I looked at my parents, who were studying their folders like they contained the secrets of the universe. I had her healthcare power of attorney. I used my own key to enter her house. I called 911 when I found her unconscious. Which part of that was problematic? The issue isn't what you did in the moment of crisis, Martinez said. The issue is what happened after. The will, the financial documents, the decisions about her ongoing care. What decisions about her ongoing care? Mom spoke up. You told the hospital staff that you were handling her discharge planning. You contacted her insurance company. You scheduled follow-up appointments. Because she needed those things and you weren't here. But we're here now, Dad said. And we think it's important that we all work together going forward. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of collaborative approach that serves everyone's interests. I realized what was happening. They weren't just worried about the will or the money. They were worried that I'd become Grandma's primary caregiver, that I'd be the one making decisions about her life and, eventually, her death. They were worried about losing control. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Martinez consulted his notes. "A family agreement that establishes clear roles and responsibilities for Mrs. Ray's care. Your parents would take primary responsibility for daily oversight and major decisions, given their proximity and availability. You would continue to hold the healthcare power of attorney, but would consult with them before making any significant choices. And the will. The will remains as she wrote it. No one is suggesting otherwise. But they were suggesting that I step back, let them take over, trust that their newfound attention would last longer than their usual enthusiasm for difficult tasks. I need to think about this, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But as we left the meeting, I could see that my parents had already made their decision. They were going to be the devoted children from now on, and I was going to be the grateful daughter who understood her place. That evening, I sat with Grandma in her hospital room while she worked on a crossword puzzle. She was being discharged the next day, and we'd been discussing options for her care at home. "How was your meeting with the lawyer?" she asked without looking up from her puzzle. "You know about that? Your mother mentioned it. 7 letters, starts with C, meaning to give up or surrender. Concede. That's it." She wrote it in carefully. "Are you going to?" "Concede what?" "Control. Authority. Your right to be angry." I didn't answer immediately. Outside her window, the parking lot was filling with evening shift workers arriving for their jobs. Normal people with normal problems, going about their normal lives. They hired a lawyer, Grandma, before they even asked how you were feeling. I know. They want me to step back, let them handle everything, pretend this never happened. And I don't trust them. I don't trust that they won't get distracted by the next vacation or the next promotion or the next whatever comes along. She set down her pencil and looked at me directly. "Then don't step back. The lawyer says the lawyer works for your parents, not for me. And not for you. They're going to fight me on this. Let them." It was the first time since I'd found her in that bedroom that she sounded like the Grandma Ruth I remembered. Strong. Decisive. Done with other people's nonsense. "But you said not to let this destroy the family." I said don't let it turn you bitter. That's different. She reached for my hand. "Michelle, I'm 83 years old. I might live another 10 years, or I might not live another 10 months. But however long I have left, I want to spend it with people who choose to be here, not people who feel obligated to show up because a lawyer told them to. So what do? You do what you've always done. You show up. You take care of what needs taking care of. And you let them prove whether they're actually sorry or just scared of looking bad." That night, I called my commanding officer and requested an extension of my emergency leave. I had savings, I had time, and I had a job to finish. My parents could keep their lawyers. I had something more powerful. I had Grandma Ruth's trust, and I wasn't going to betray it. The next 6 weeks taught me more about family dynamics than 28 years of actually being part of a family. My parents threw themselves into caregiving with the intensity of people trying to prove a point. They hired housekeepers and meal delivery services, installed grab bars and shower seats, and created medication schedules color-coded by importance and time of day. Mom took a leave of absence from work to be available for appointments and emergencies. Dad started coming by every morning before the office and every evening after work. They brought groceries and flowers, fixed leaky faucets and squeaky doors, and generally transformed themselves into the kind of attentive adult children that other families envied. It should have made me happy. It should have been exactly what I wanted. But there was something hollow about it all, something that felt more like penance than love. They were performing the role of good children, hitting all the right marks, saying all the right things, but underneath it felt like they were waiting for permission to go back to their regular lives. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late November. I'd stayed overnight at Grandma's house because she'd been feeling dizzy the day before, and I wanted to monitor her condition. Around 10 a.m., Mom showed up with her usual bag of supplies, fresh fruit, magazines, a new puzzle book. "How's she feeling today?" she asked, hanging up her coat in the front closet. "Better. The dizziness seems to have passed. Good, that's good. She was already moving toward the kitchen, unpacking groceries with efficient movements. I brought those pears she likes, and the bakery had her favorite cookies. I watched her work, thinking about how strange it was to see her in this kitchen. Growing up, Mom had always seemed too polished for Grandma's simple house, too sophisticated for the yellow wallpaper and worn linoleum floors. But now she moved through the space like she belonged there, like she'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "Mom," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." She was arranging the pears in Grandma's fruit bowl, the one I remembered from childhood. "Why didn't you check on her before?" "I mean, really check on her, not just phone calls." Her hands stilled. "Michelle, we've been over this. I know what you've said. I want to know what you actually think." She turned to face me, and for a moment, she looked older than her 56 years. I thought she was fine. I thought she would always be fine. She'd been taking care of all of us for so long that it never occurred to me that someday we'd need to take care of her. It was the most honest thing she'd said since coming back from Ibiza. And now? Now I'm terrified that I waited too long. That I'm too late to matter. Her voice cracked slightly. "She doesn't need me, Michelle. She needs you. She's always needed you more than she needed us." "That's not true, isn't it? You're the one who came home from war to check on her. You're the one who found her. You're the one she trusted with her healthcare decisions. We're just the ones who showed up after the crisis was over." I didn't know how to respond to that because there was truth in it, but not the kind of truth that helped anyone. "She loves you," I said finally. "Both of you. But love isn't enough if you're not present for it. I know that now." Later that afternoon, Dad arrived for his usual evening check-in, carrying takeout containers from Grandma's favorite Italian restaurant. We sat around her small dining table, the same one where I'd eaten countless meals as a child, and tried to have a normal family dinner. But normal was complicated now. We all knew too much about each other, had said too many things that couldn't be unsaid. Dad kept checking his phone despite promising to put work aside. Mom was overly cheerful, the kind of forced brightness that made everyone uncomfortable. And Grandma seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with her recent health scare. "I've been thinking," she said as Dad served portions of chicken parmesan, "about maybe selling the house." The room went quiet except for the sound of silverware against plates. "Mom, you don't need to make any big decisions right now," Dad said carefully. "I'm not making any decisions. I'm just thinking." She took a small bite and chewed slowly. "This house is too big for one person. Too much maintenance. Too many memories." "The memories are good memories," Mom said quickly. "Some of them are. Some of them aren't." Grandma looked at each of us in turn. "I'm tired of being the keeper of everyone else's childhood. I'm tired of being the place you all come back to when you need something familiar." "We don't think of it that way," I said. "Don't you?" She set down her fork. "Michelle, you've been sleeping here every night for 6 weeks. Carol, you've rearranged your entire life around my medical appointments. David, you're spending more time in this house now than you did when you actually lived here. And all of you are treating me like I'm made of glass." She was right. We were all tiptoeing around her, around each other, around the truth of what had happened and what it meant. "What do you want?" Dad asked. "I want to stop feeling like I'm everyone's obligation. I want to stop worrying that if I have another health scare, it'll become a family crisis that requires lawyers and emergency meetings and people rearranging their lives out of guilt." "It's not guilt," Mom said. "Isn't it?" None of us could answer that. "I want," Grandma continued, "to figure out how to be your mother without being your burden. And I want you all to figure out how to be my children without it being a crisis management situation." That night, after my parents left, I helped Grandma get ready for bed, and then sat in her living room, thinking about what she'd said. She was right about all of it. We had turned her recovery into a performance of family devotion, complete with schedules and assignments and evidence that we were doing everything right this time. But we weren't actually dealing with a fundamental problem. We still didn't know how to be a family that functioned during normal times, not just during emergencies. My phone rang around midnight. It was Mom. "I can't sleep," she said without preamble. "Neither can I. She wants us to stop. All of this, the hovering, the guilt, the trying so hard to prove we care. She wants us to stop." "Yeah, But if we stop, what if something happens again? What if she needs help and we miss it? Then we miss it. And we deal with the consequences. Michelle, I can't live with that. You can't live with the alternative either. None of us can. There was a long pause. What do we do? I don't know, I said. But I think we start by admitting that we don't know how to do this, and then we figure it out as we go. Without lawyers? Without lawyers. Without schedules and assignments and color-coded medication charts? Maybe some schedules. But less performance. More just showing up because we want to, not because we're trying to prove something. Can you forgive us? She asked suddenly. For not being here when she needed us? I thought about that question for a long time. I think, I said finally, the person you need to ask for forgiveness is Grandma. And yourselves. What about you? I'm working on it. 3 months later, Grandma Ruth moved into a senior living community 20 minutes from my parents' house. Not because she couldn't live independently, but because she wanted to. She'd visited 3 different places, interviewed staff members like she was hiring employees, and chosen the one with the best library and the most interesting residents. I'm not moving because I'm giving up, she told us during one of our family dinners at her kitchen table. I'm moving because I'm starting over. My parents handled the news better than I'd expected. There was some initial resistance. Mom worried about the cost, Dad questioned whether it was necessary, but they ultimately supported her decision. More importantly, they didn't try to manage it for her. The transition revealed things about all of us that I hadn't expected. Dad turned out to be surprisingly good at practical logistics, coordinating movers and utilities and address changes without turning it into a spreadsheet project. Mom had an eye for helping Grandma decide which furniture would work in a smaller space and which family photos would make her new apartment feel like home. And I learned that letting go was harder than holding on. I'd extended my military leave twice, officially to help with Grandma's transition, but really because I wasn't ready to go back to my old life. The structure and purpose that had made sense in Iraq felt less clear at home. I'd found my mission in taking care of Grandma, in being the reliable one, in proving that I understood what family meant. But now she didn't need taking care of, at least not the intensive kind I'd been providing. She had neighbors who played bridge and staff members who checked on residents and activities that kept her busier than she'd been in years. She was thriving in a way that made my constant vigilance unnecessary. You know you can go back to your life now, she said during one of my visits to her new place. We were sitting in her apartment living room, which was smaller than her old one, but somehow felt more spacious. She'd kept the furniture that mattered and donated the rest, creating a space that felt intentional rather than accumulated. This is my life now. No, it's not. She set down her teacup and looked at me directly. You're a soldier, Michelle. That's who you are, not someone who hovers around old ladies making sure they take their vitamins. I like taking care of you. I know you do. But taking care of people isn't the same as having a purpose. It was a fair point, though I wasn't ready to admit it. My parents had settled into a routine that worked better than our crisis management approach. Mom visited twice a week, usually bringing lunch from somewhere Grandma wanted to try. Dad came by on weekends to handle any maintenance issues or just to sit and talk. They called regularly but not obsessively, and they'd stopped treating every minor health concern like an emergency. More significantly, they'd stopped performing their devotion for an audience. The Facebook posts about family and gratitude had tapered off. The elaborate gestures and expensive gifts had been replaced by smaller, more consistent attention. They were learning to be present without making it about themselves. But there were still tensions, still moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. Like the afternoon when Mom showed up at Grandma's apartment with a list of medical questions she'd researched online, or the evening when Dad brought printouts comparing Medicare supplement plans because he thought Grandma might not be getting the best coverage. They're trying, Grandma said after one of these incidents. They're trying very hard to be better children. But they're still trying to manage me instead of just being with me. It's better than ignoring you. Yes, it is. But it's not the same as trusting me. I was beginning to understand what she meant. We'd all learned to show up, but we hadn't learned to let her be in charge of her own life. We were still operating from a place of fear that she'd get sick again, fear that we'd miss something important, fear that we'd fail her the way we had before. The test came in April, when Grandma fell in her apartment and bruised her hip. Nothing was broken, but the facility called all of us as a precaution. I got there first, followed quickly by my parents, and for a few minutes, it felt like we were back in crisis mode. But Grandma shut that down immediately. "I fell," she announced when we were all gathered in her living room, looking worried and ready to spring into action. I was reaching for a book on a high shelf, I lost my balance, and I fell. It happens to people my age. It's going to happen again. "Maybe we should look at rearranging your furniture," Mom suggested. "Maybe you should trust me to know how I want my apartment arranged." "We just want to help," Dad said. "You can help by not treating every minor incident like a catastrophe." "I'm bruised, not dying. I'm 83, not helpless." She was right, but it was hard not to react to any sign that she might need us. We'd all gotten used to being essential to her survival, and accepting that she could handle most things on her own meant accepting that our roles in her life were smaller than we'd thought. That evening, as my parents and I sat in the hospital cafeteria while Grandma got X-rays that would confirm what we already knew, that she was fine, Dad said something that surprised me. "I keep waiting for her to need us the way she needed us that first week. When we felt indispensable." "You want her to need us?" "Not exactly. But there was something satisfying about being able to fix things for her. About feeling like we were finally doing enough." Mom nodded. "It's easier to take care of someone in a crisis than to just love them during normal life." It was the most insightful thing either of them had said since this whole situation began. "Maybe that's the problem," I said. "Maybe we've been thinking about this wrong. Maybe it's not about doing enough. Maybe it's just about being present for whatever she needs, even if what she needs is space to live her own life." "That's harder," Dad said. "Yeah, it is." When Grandma's X-rays came back clear, she insisted on going home to her apartment rather than spending the night under observation. The facility staff was supportive. This kind of thing happened regularly with their residents, but my parents wanted her to be extra cautious. "What if you fall again tonight?" Mom asked. "Then I'll call for help. That's what the emergency button is for." "What if you don't wake up when you fall?" "Then I won't wake up." That's a risk I'm willing to take to keep living in my own space. It was a conversation we'd been avoiding, but it was also a conversation we needed to have. Grandma was going to get older, more fragile, more at risk for exactly these kinds of incidents. We couldn't prevent that by hovering or managing or creating elaborate safety protocols. We could only decide how we wanted to love her through it. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "I want you to visit because you enjoy my company, not because you're checking on me. I want you to call when you have something to say, not because it's Tuesday and Tuesday is Call Grandma Day. I want you to trust that I'll ask for help when I need it, and I want you to respect my right to take reasonable risks." "What if we disagree about what's reasonable?" Dad asked. "Then we disagree. But it's still my choice." That night, I stayed in my old room at my parents' house instead of at Grandma's apartment. It felt strange to be back in the space where I'd grown up, surrounded by high school photos and participation trophies, and the detritus of a childhood that felt very far away. Mom knocked on my door around 10 p.m. "Can we talk?" She sat on the edge of my bed, something she hadn't done since I was probably 12 years old. "I've been thinking about what your grandmother said. About trusting her to know what she needs. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to love someone without trying to protect them from every possible harm." "Mom, you can't protect people from life." "I know that intellectually. But emotionally, she's my mother, Michelle. She took care of me for 18 years, and then she took care of all of us in different ways for decades after that. The idea of her being vulnerable, of bad things happening to her that I can't prevent, it's terrifying." I understood that feeling. I'd spent the past 4 months trying to anticipate and prevent every possible problem Grandma might face, as if my vigilance could keep her safe from the reality of aging. "Maybe the point isn't to stop being scared," I said. "Maybe the point is to be scared and still let her live her life." "Is that what you're going to do? Let her live her life while you go back to yours?" It was the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. My leave was almost up, and I needed to make a decision about my future. I could request a transfer to a stateside post, stay close to home, continue being the family member who is always available for emergencies. Or I could go back to my unit, back to the work that had given my life structure and meaning for the past 6 years. I don't know, I said honestly. What does your grandmother think you should do? Go back to Iraq. And what do you think you should do? I looked around my childhood bedroom, at the evidence of who I used to be before I learned about duty and sacrifice and showing up when people needed you. I think I should stop making decisions based on guilt and fear and start making them based on what actually makes sense for my life. And what makes sense? I'm still figuring that out. I decided to go back, but not to Iraq. I requested a transfer to a stateside position that would keep me in the military, but allow me to be within driving distance of home. It felt like a compromise, but it also felt like the right choice for who I was becoming. The decision didn't happen all at once. It took weeks of conversations with my commanding officer, with military counselors, with grandma, and mostly with myself. I'd spent so much time defining myself by my ability to handle emergencies that I'd forgotten how to make choices during ordinary circumstances. But gradually, I began to understand that the most important thing I'd learned over the past few months wasn't how to manage a crisis. It was how to be present for someone without losing myself in the process. My parents threw a small going-away party the night before I was supposed to leave for my new assignment. Just family, plus a few neighbors who'd known me since I was a kid. Nothing elaborate, just dinner and cake in Grandma's new apartment, surrounded by the people who'd watched me grow up. It should have been a celebration, but it felt more like a reckoning. We were all different people than we'd been 6 months earlier, shaped by crisis and forgiveness and the hard work of learning to love each other better. I'm proud of you, Dad said as we were cleaning up afterward. For everything you did, but also for knowing when to step back. I'm still figuring out the stepping back part. We all are. Mom hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes, but they were different tears than the ones she'd cried in the hospital waiting room. These felt like tears of gratitude rather than guilt. Call us, she said. Not because you have to check on us, just because you want to talk. I will. But it was Grandma's goodbye that stayed with me. She walked me to my car, moving slowly but steadily, and handed me a small wrapped package. Don't open it now, she said. Open it when you get to your new base. When you're feeling settled. What is it? A reminder. Of what? That you came home when I needed you, but more importantly, that you knew when it was time to leave again. I drove away from that apartment complex with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I was leaving behind the intense, exhausting intimacy of crisis management, but I was also carrying forward something more valuable, the knowledge that I could trust my family to take care of each other without my constant supervision. The package from Grandma contained a photo I'd never seen before, me at 7 years old in her kitchen, covered in flour, grinning at the camera while holding up a perfectly imperfect apple turnover. On the back, in her careful handwriting, some things are worth the wait. Some things are worth coming home for. And some things are worth carrying with you wherever you go. Over the following months, I settled into my new role and my new life. I visited home regularly but not obsessively. I called my parents and Grandma because I wanted to hear their voices, not because I was checking up on them. I slowly learned to trust that they could handle ordinary problems without me, and they learned to trust that I would come if they really needed me. The crisis that had brought me home had ended, but the relationships it had changed continued to evolve. My parents became more consistent caregivers and less dramatic ones. Grandma settled into her new community and made friends with people who appreciated her sharp wit and endless stories about her granddaughter in the military. And I learned that showing up for family didn't always mean dropping everything and rushing to the rescue. Sometimes it meant trusting people to handle their own lives, offering support without taking over, and understanding that love looked different during calm times than it did during emergencies. We'd all gotten through the crisis, but more than that, we'd figured out how to be a family that could survive ordinary life. And that, it turned out, was the harder and more important skill. 2 years later, I was home on leave when Grandma Ruth died peacefully in her sleep. She was 85, had been living independently in her senior community right up until the end, and had spent her last evening playing bridge with friends and complaining good-naturedly about the cafeteria's latest attempt at healthy menu options. The call came from the facility director at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was staying at my parents' house, and Mom answered the phone in the kitchen while I was getting coffee. I knew what had happened before she said a word, just from the way her face changed. "She's gone," Mom said simply, hanging up the phone. Peacefully. In her sleep. Dad appeared in the doorway in his bathrobe, took one look at our faces, and understood immediately. We stood there in the early morning light, the three of us who'd learned to love each other better because of her, and grieved for the woman who'd made it possible. The funeral planning revealed how much we'd all grown. There were no arguments about arrangements, no power struggles about who was in charge, no lawyers. We worked together quietly and efficiently, making decisions based on what Grandma would have wanted rather than what would make us feel better about ourselves. She'd left detailed instructions, of course. She wanted a simple service at the church she'd attended for 40 years, followed by burial next to Grandpa in the cemetery where they'd bought plots decades earlier. She wanted donations to the local food bank instead of flowers, and she wanted the reception to include her famous apple turnovers, made from the recipe she'd taught me when I was 7. The turnover detail almost broke me. Not because it was sad, but because it was so perfectly her, practical, loving, and designed to bring people together around food and memory. The service was exactly what she would have wanted. The church was full but not overcrowded, filled with people whose lives she'd touched in quiet ways over 8.5 decades. Her bridge partners from the senior community, neighbors from her old house, former students from the Sunday school classes she'd taught for 20 years, military families she'd supported during various deployments and homecomings. My parents each spoke briefly, sharing memories that were genuine rather than performative. Dad talked about how she'd taught him to change a tire when he was 16, patiently standing in the driveway while he wrestled with jack handles and lug nuts. Mom remembered how Grandma had come to stay with her for 2 weeks after I was born, cooking and cleaning and holding the baby so Mom could shower and sleep. I spoke last, keeping it simple. I talked about apple turnovers and summer afternoons on the front porch, about letters that arrived every week during deployment, about the kind of love that showed up consistently rather than dramatically. I didn't mention the crisis that had brought me home, or the complicated months that followed. That wasn't the story that needed telling at her funeral. But afterward, at the reception in the church fellowship hall, people came up to me with their own stories. The neighbor who mentioned that Grandma had been checking on her elderly mother for years, bringing groceries and staying for tea. The young military wife who said Grandma had babysit her children during a difficult deployment. The postal worker who remembered how she always had cold water ready for mail carriers during hot summer days. She'd been taking care of people her entire life, quietly and without drama, in ways that most of us never knew about. The will reading the following week was anticlimactic. Everything was exactly as we'd expected. House sold, proceeds split 3 ways along with her other assets. No surprises, no last-minute changes, no dramatic revelations. She'd been thorough and fair, and she'd trusted us to handle the practical details without supervision. But there were personal bequests that revealed how well she'd known each of us. Dad received Grandpa's tools and workshop equipment, not because he was handy, but because she thought he might enjoy learning to build things with his hands. Mom got Grandma's jewelry and photo albums, the kind of family history that she would preserve and pass on to the next generation. I received her recipe collection, handwritten on index cards and scraps of paper, accumulated over decades of feeding people she loved. But more than that, I received a letter she'd written shortly after I'd gone back to active duty. Michelle, it began, if you're reading this, then I've gone on ahead, and you're probably sitting in some lawyer's office feeling sad and maybe a little angry that I'm not there to help you figure out what comes next. I want you to know that the months after you came home from Iraq were the happiest I'd had in years. Not because I was sick or because there was drama or because everyone was paying attention to me. They were happy because I got to see the woman you'd become, strong and capable and fierce when the people you love need protecting. But I also got to see you learn something that took me much longer to figure out, that loving people doesn't mean controlling their lives, and that taking care of family doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. You came home when I needed you, but more importantly, you knew when to leave again. You let your parents find their way back to being my children without competing with them or holding grudges about their mistakes. You trusted me to live my own life even when you were scared about what might happen to me. That's the hardest kind of love, the kind that steps back when stepping back is what's needed. I'm proud of you for learning it so young. The money and the house and all the practical things will get sorted out by lawyers and accountants. But the real inheritance I'm leaving you is the knowledge that you know how to show up for people without losing yourself, and you know how to love people enough to let them make their own choices. Keep making apple turnovers. Keep writing letters to people you care about. Keep coming home when family needs you, but remember that sometimes what family needs most is for you to live your own life fully and happily. All my love, Grandma Ruth. P.S. Your parents are good people who made some bad choices. They've learned from those choices. Trust them to keep learning. I read that letter 3 times sitting in the lawyer's office, with my parents waiting quietly beside me. When I finished, I handed it to them without comment, and we sat together while they read it, passing it back and forth like a document that required joint interpretation. She forgave us, Mom said finally. She trusted us, Dad added. All of us, I said. And that, it turned out, was her final gift. Not just forgiveness for the mistakes we'd made, but trust that we'd continue growing into the kind of family she'd always believed we could be. The legacy she left wasn't money or property or even recipes written on index cards. It was the knowledge that family isn't about perfection or obligation or managing each other's choices. It's about showing up consistently, loving people through their mistakes, and trusting them to find their own way toward becoming better versions of themselves. We'd all learned that lesson the hard way, through crisis and conflict and the messy work of rebuilding trust. But we'd learned it together, and that made all the difference. Grandma Ruth had been right about everything, as usual. Good things really do take time. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for the people you love is trust them to handle their own lives while you handle yours. That's the kind of family we became, eventually. The kind she always knew we could be. So that's how I learned the difference between being needed and being valued, and why sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who trust you enough to let you live your own life. Grandma Ruth's final lesson wasn't about forgiveness or family drama. It was about showing up consistently, not just during crises, and loving people enough to let them make their own choices, even when those choices scare you. Here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been the reliable one in your family? The person everyone calls when things fall apart? How did you learn to set boundaries without burning bridges? And if you've ever had to step back and trust people to handle their own lives, how did that work out? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people realize they're not alone in these complicated family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, boundaries, and finding your way back to yourself. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is trust people to grow into who they're meant to be, even when it's terrifying to let go.